Let's put Olympics aside for a couple of minutes, though, and talk about the fact that today is International Tiger Day. Now, this is a global event that is meant to raise awareness of the conservation status of tigers and of the threats to their natural habitat. And before you ask, well, what relevance does that have to South Africa? Because the tiger's not a native species here. Let me stop you in your tracks with the figure that there are apparently at least 600 of these magnificent cats living in this country. 600 tigers in South Africa. Where are they? How did they come to be here? Why are they here? To answer some of those questions, we chat to Fiona Miles, who is director of the South African branch of International Animal Welfare Organisation for PAWS. Fiona, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Pippa. Thanks so much for having us.
Sure. Before we talk about South Africa, just generally, globally, what is the conservation status of tigers? I know there are several different species. How many of those are under threat?
I think all tigers are under threat. They are Appendix 1, CITES Appendix 1 animals, which means that they are very threatened. And of course, this is due to a number of reasons, like their range states, the range states where they live and naturally occur. Obviously, there's habitat destruction and things like that, which obviously make their living areas much smaller. And of course, due to poaching and various other reasons, the numbers have declined significantly. That means that they are, in danger of being extinct one day. So yes, it's a scary situation for tigers.
Now, when I read the stat that you think there are at least 600 of them here in South Africa, my jaw hit the floor, Fiona. Let's talk about where they are, where they're being kept, how they come to be here, and especially the fact that you think that 600 is probably a low estimate.
That's right. South Africa has actually been intensively farming big cats, and of course tigers being part of big cats, primarily lions, for the last 30 years or so. That's an industry that's sort of been allowed to grow unfettered for about 30 years. And across the country, there's at least 350 breeding farms that are breeding big cats. And in a recent study, let's say, and sort of official audits done by the ministerial task team appointed to have a look at voluntary exit options for this industry. Yeah. In other words, that there would be no more intensive breeding of lions for commercial purposes. They came up with a number, according to official, authority figures, of about 600 that live in these breeding farms. They are often raised together with lions and other big cats. And the reason why is because there's a market for them. There's a market for live, tigers being exported back to countries that make use of them for traditional medicine or for, jewelry and things like that, as well as, also for the purpose of breeding them elsewhere. So, yes, South Africa is sitting with approximately 10,000 lions, and we estimate 600 tigers, but a lot more we imagine, because many of these facilities are also open to the public, where you can go and pet a cub, walk with these animals and interact with them. And there's always a fairly readily amount of cubs available, right? So it means that there's probably a lot more animals being processed through this, we call it the vicious cycle of being sort of born into captivity like this.
Fiona, I mean, any animal in captivity is something that people find problematic, but to think of an animal like this, a big cat, which would in the wild in its natural habitat have, I would imagine, a huge territory that it could live in and operate in and hunt in. Can you try and explain to us, I mean, how awful their existence must be? How big are the cages they're being raised in places like this? Is there anything resembling normal life in any way for these animals?
No, there's nothing resembling a normal life. The cubs are taken away from their mothers when they are very, very young. They are hand-raised by, let's say, unsuspecting and unwitting volunteers who often believe that the cubs have been rejected by the mother, or that they're orphaned, and that possibly they're doing this for conservation purposes, like being able to be rewilded, which is absolutely not the case. And of course, South Africa is not the natural place to rewild these animals. And, as I mentioned earlier on, they can be used as photo props and for selfies and cub petting and all of this, all the way through. They live in conditions that are absolutely abnormal, with the human interaction, but also the size of the space that they are kept in. I don't think, sort of a few hundred square meter cage, so to say, without any sort of natural environment is any way to live. Often without enrichment as well. Living in the natural environment, there would be a lot of environmental enrichment, things that could, stimulate all the natural behaviors. And oftentimes, these animals are really languishing. I can't think of another word, but sort of languishing in these enclosures. So it's really it's not a nice life all the way from birth to death.
Yeah. So Fiona, let's talk about what we can do to break that vicious cycle. You've mentioned the sort of the tourist activities, the come and walk with the cats or cuddle a cub. Obviously, the one thing we can do is say we refuse to engage in those activities. We will not pay money into that system. We'll encourage our friends and families to reject doing so as well. But what else can be done to change this position? I mean, I know that you and other animal welfare organizations have drawn up a kind of roadmap that could lead to change. Do you want to briefly tell us what that roadmap entails and what strategies you could pursue?
Sure, of course. Obviously, with the number of animals that are in captivity, nothing's going to change overnight. So firstly, we would ask, of people to sign petitions and really ask the government to include all big cats in the current voluntary exit discussions when it comes to the lions, because these tigers are at the same facilities. And we are concerned that if the focus is not on all the big cats, the shift will, just be made to intensively breeding further on tigers and other non-indigenous species. And of course, at the moment, there's the view on voluntary exit, but the end of the day is that the voluntary exit is for a period of time, in other words, inviting those breeders to voluntarily exit. And after that, we really need to put a moratorium on breeding, and we need to put a moratorium on any further facilities opening up, and that at the end of the day, there should be no further intensive breeding, and we should stop exporting these animals. So we need to call on the government to speed up the process and to actually take a look at that roadmap and ask them to come forward with a plan, and a time-bound plan that actually puts goals in place that we can actually see an end to this. In other words, if you stop breeding and give these animals the best possible welfare and care for the rest of their lives, ultimately there won't be any more being intensively bred in captivity.
Fiona Miles, thank you so much for that update, Director of PAWS South Africa. And if you'd like to read up more about their activity and find out more about this roadmap and where petitions can be signed, etc., please visit their website, which is www.for-paws.org.za. And it's the word for spelt out, for-paws.org.za. Today being International Tiger Day. Do spare a thought for the 600 plus tigers living in cages in South Africa.